talk about enthymemes, and I'm using Zoom software, and I will share my notes with you. That should make this a little bit easier. An enthymeme is an argument which has a premise or a conclusion which is not explicitly stated. Now, enthymemes are not bad. The main point with enthymemes is just this. In order to do what you're supposed to do in logic class, which is evaluate an argument to see whether the premises provide good support for their conclusion. In order to do that, you need to be able to identify all the premises and the conclusion. So sometimes you must find the unstated statement and state it explicitly. Now, let's talk about the good news and the bad news about enthymemes. Aristotle's point is very good. This is in his book, The Rhetoric. Sometimes leaving the obvious unstated can save some time and keep the audience from getting bored or getting lost in details. And so it can be rhetorically useful. You know, we don't have to talk like robots and spell out every single logical step of an argument. Human beings don't need to do that. The defendant has no history of violent crime, so he's not the one who murdered the victim. You might say this in court, and the unstated premise is that people with no history of violent crime are not usually the kind of people who commit this kind of murder. So if you are analyzing this argument to see if the premises provide good support from the conclusion, you'll want to restate it. You'll want to say, some fashion, this is probably not formal enough, but as formal as you can. This is a very brief, rough draft of how you would manage the argument. You'd want to say, premise, this defendant has no history of violent crime. Let's not number them, let's just give them letter names. Premise 1, this defendant has no history of violent crime. Conclusion, therefore, defendant is not the murderer. And you want to state the unstated premise, which is probably something like this. People with no history of violent crime rarely commit this kind of murder. Obviously, whether this premise is true will depend somewhat on the circumstances. What sort of violent crime are we talking about exactly? I don't know. Depends on the circumstances. It depends on exactly what is the context. A lot of the analysis of an argument will sometimes depend on context. So a lot of this is not relevant to, not strictly speaking, something we study in logic class. But anyway, it is acceptable in some circumstances to leave a premise like this unstated. This is Aristotle's point, and this is the good news about enthymeme. Sometimes it's okay to leave the obvious unstated for rhetorical reasons and just to be an ordinary human being and not act like a robot, spelling out every last. But enthymemes can be abused. Richard Purtill's book, A Logical Introduction to Philosophy, is very good. I strongly recommend this book as an intro to philosophy and as an intro to logic. Purtill points out that arguments based on prejudice are often put into enthymematic form. Now, I mean no disrespect to Scandinavians or Polish people, and for that matter, I don't think Purtill did either, but these are his examples. Shall we give them some names? Let's just give them some names. Let me reach for a couple of nearby Bible names. Sarah is Scandinavian, so she has no sense of humor. Or John is Polish, so he's dumb. The unstated premises here are that Scandinavians don't have a sense of humor and Polish people are dumb. These are not good premises. But if you put an inappropriate premise in an unstated form, if you leave a prejudicial or disrespectful or in some other way inappropriate or unreasonable premise, if you leave such a premise unstated, you might persuade your audience more easily, but you might be doing it illegitimately, and this is exactly why logic is important. So you can do things like identify the unstated premise, and then you're in a position to expose the argument for the problem it is. And what is the problem? The problem here is not that the premises fail to support the conclusion. In these cases, the premises do a fine job supporting the conclusion. The problem is that one of the premises is false, but you can correctly identify this. You can say, okay, this is a valid argument or a strong argument, depending on how exactly you phrase this. If you say most Scandinavians have no sense of humor, most Polish people are dumb, then you have a strong argument where the premises provide good support for the conclusion. Or if you say all Scandinavians have no sense of humor, all Polish people are dumb, then you have arguments that are valid. The premises guarantee the conclusion. But once you've done all this, you're in a position to say, and the argument is unsound because that second premise is false. It's not true that all Scandinavians have no sense of humor, all Polish people are dumb. Or the argument is uncogent because it's not true that most Scandinavians have no sense of humor or most Polish people are dumb. You can correctly object to an argument by objecting to its premises once you've done all the necessary work. Now, here are a couple of my own examples of the sorts of arguments that might be inappropriately used as an enthymeme came to mind. I tossed out one for each side here. Senator Smith is a Democrat, so he must be a liberal tree hugger. Unstated premise, most or all Democrats are liberal tree huggers. Senator Jones is a Republican, so obviously she only cares about the rich. Unstated premise, obviously Republicans only care about the rich. So identify the unstated premise, in some cases the unstated conclusion, and then evaluate the argument according to first whether the premises support the conclusion, which is primarily a logic class thing. But then do, if necessary, that which logic class itself does not normally teach. Logic class is about 99% interested in whether the premises provide good support for the conclusion. Everything else in life is where you deal with whether the premises are true, but logic can get you to that point. Logic can get you to identifying the premise, identifying the other premises, whichever is unstated, identifying the conclusion, maybe that's unstated, and identifying whether the premises do a good job supporting the conclusion. And then if they do, and if need be, logic can get you to the point where you can say, the problem is that premise. It's just not true. And anyone who thinks it's true is a jerk. Something like that, perhaps. All right. That's some brief introduction to enthymemes. See you next time.